Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Tabman, and welcome to Crimes and Times. I want to thank everybody for going to our little YouTube channel and subscribing. If you keep doing that, we'd appreciate it. We're only a handful away from reaching that magic 100 number. So I'm going to ask the audience tonight, if I say the word serial killer, who are you thinking about? And I bet I know the answer. Ted Bundy. Tonight we have a very well-renowned expert on Ted Bundy. He's an author and he helps create shows about him. We have author Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, are you there? And I do not hear Kevin. So let's get him back. Kevin?
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I told you we're always going to have a tech problem somewhere along the way. Otherwise, it's not Crimes and Times. That's part of the crimes. So anyway, Kevin, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into writing, and then how you got to become an expert on Ted Bundy.
Well, first of all, I guess I should say when I was 10 years old, my father was an attorney. And when I was 10 years old, I picked a book off of his shelf called The World's Worst Murderers by a man named Charles Franklin. It was a book that was, Franklin was a British author, and the book was published in 1965, and it also had an American edition that same year. And I found that book, I was 10 years old, I found that book on my dad's shelf. The book was published in 19, and I was fascinated by it. And so, it took me about 3 weeks to read it. I had to stop a number of times, ask my mother certain words, what they meant, how to pronounce them. I mean, what can you do at 10, right? But I never asked them if they felt it was weird or anything, but I had this fascination for true crime, and it was the first adult book that I had ever read. Well, throughout the years, I kept reading about true crime, and I would read about war. Like I said the other night on the show, my father was in World War II. His brother was killed in World War II. His uncle was killed in World War II. And so I would learn about these wars. I would hear stories that the families would tell. And so I would read about wars and conflicts and things like that. And then as a vocation, I didn't go into writing, right away, but as a vocation, I went into the ministry, and I was ordained back in 1984. And I'm still in the ministry, kind of like a semi-retired thing, and I still do that. But mostly I write books now, and I've been writing books since 1995. Mostly I write true crime. I also write some history, but I never had any intention about writing about Ted Bundy. It was something that kind of dropped in my lap. I had a friend here in Louisville. He has passed on now, but his name was James Massey. He was a probation and parole officer here in the state of Kentucky. And he had been friends with a retired Salt Lake City detective by the name of Jerry Thompson. And folks that know the Bundy case will know that Jerry Thompson was the lead detective for the Bundy case in Utah. And so Jim called me one day. He said, listen, Jerry and his wife are coming to Louisville. Would you like to, meet and have dinner with us? And I said, yeah, that would be great. Because, he and I had talked about Ted Bundy, and we talked about his relation with Jerry. So I thought, well, this would be a nice time to, meet him. And occasionally I would submit articles to a local print newspaper here in Louisville. Actually, it was published in Louisville, Lexington, Kentucky, and in four or five other states. It was called Snitch, and it was a weekly print paper that was devoted to issues of crime and the law. And so I thought, well, maybe this might make for a good article for like Snitch, but there was nothing about Bundy per se on my radar. Well, when this is back in 2005, and when they came here in May of 2005, Jim called me and he said, listen, you should meet us at such and such time at this restaurant. And I was about to say, okay, thanks. And he said, he brought the bag. And I said, what bag? And he said, the bag Ted Bundy carried, his murder kit. I have it with me now in my truck. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. I said, Jim, you've got to let me see that a few minutes early before they get there, I would like to see this stuff. So I did. Then I got to have a nice meeting with Jerry and his wife. Then after the dinner, we went back to the hotel, and Jerry and Jim and I sat around the pool and talked about the Bundy case. And then the Thompsons were here in Louisville for a couple of days. And so they turned the murder kit over to Jim. Well, the next night, I called Jim and I asked him, would you mind if I bring the stuff over to my house and photograph it all? So I brought this murder kit. It was so surreal. I put it in my car, the passenger seat. I drove home. I called my wife from the car and I said, listen, honey, I'm bringing Ted Bundy's murder kit into the home. I said, listen, she was not thrilled. I said, usually there's nothing on our dining room table, but just in case there would be, I said, let me take it off. I'd like to spread this stuff out on the dining room table and take photographs. My son-in-law was over there too at the home. And so he helped me spread the stuff out. And it was so surreal having that kit in my house and handling that stuff. And so, after I was done taking pictures and stuff, I gave it back to Jim. And then before the Thompsons left, Jerry Thompson gave me and gave Jim one of the large green Glad trash bags from Bundy's murder kit. And what he would use these bags for is to place the clothes of the victims in these bags, and he dumped them somewhere else far from the body in dumpsters down the road or whatever. And when Bundy was arrested and his murder kit was taken from him, he had a Glad box that held 10, but there were only 7 left. So he had used 3. So periodically he had to buy more bags, obviously, and he had used 3 out of this one. So he gave me one, he gave Jim one, and I asked Jerry, I said, Jerry, would you mind writing us a letter of authentication? He said, sure. And so, bringing that home, so I thought, well, I'm going to write an article for Snitch about this, and I did. And I thought that would be it, but it was so surreal. I said to myself, I was looking for another book to write anyway. I'd written 2 books by this time. One had been published, and one was I was shopping to a publisher, and I thought I need another book to write anyway. So I think I will. And some people that learned that I was going to write a book about Bundy, they said, hey, you know what? He's been done to death. You shouldn't do that. But sometimes, and I've said this often, you have to go with what you know. Mm-hmm. And I knew on the inside of me, I just know. I had this really strong gut feeling. I needed to do it. And so I started researching. I got all the case files from all the states. I visited a lot of places. And I was really glad I did, because halfway through the book, during my time of research, I was finding out new and never before published information about a number of these murders. And a lot of new information about the case in general, stuff that other writers had missed, and stuff that, in the case of one detective, he was never comfortable until now. This was like, almost 20 years after, not quite, but during my research period, it was like 17 years after Bundy was put to death. And, but he was more comfortable at talking about things, and he trusted me. And so I got a lot of new information. And so by the time the book, again, was halfway through it, it was taking on kind of like a life of its own. And so it's the book ended up being titled The Bundy Murders, A Comprehensive History. And that is the book that really put me on the map as a true crime writer. And
excellent. Now, Kevin, we already got questions coming in to show you how much intrigue and curiosity there is in Ted Bundy. So some people are asking right away, they want to hear a little bit about, can you kind of start with Ted Bundy's young life and what you discovered in terms of where you think the turning point was in setting him down the road to becoming a serial killer? Did he show signs in his personality? Were there things in his life that kind of pushed him in that direction? And a combination of both, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He had, there were some things that were obviously wrong with the child at times when he was young. There were a couple of occasions when he was a small boy when he and his mother were living with her family in Pennsylvania, and the aunts, a couple of his aunts or aunts, they have a couple stories that are a little on the disturbing side. And one was that one of his aunts woke up one morning, was, I guess, awakened by something that he was doing, and he had taken butcher knives from the kitchen, steak knives or whatever, and placed them, raised her cover, and placed them around the bed with the things pointing at her. And apparently, she was stunned, and then he had just kind of like a blank look on his face. Now, he was just a little boy at the time, and probably not more than maybe 3 or 4.
Wow.
And, he didn't do anything. And then there was another incident, either by the same individual or it could be another aunt. But what happened was she was standing at a railroad station around dusk with him. They had gone into the city or something, taken like an Amtrak or whatever. And something happened, and she said she never really went into it in great detail other than his personality changed, and something happened to him, and his personality kind of morphed while he was standing there with her at dusk on this train platform. And she said that, it bothered her. It scared her. And so you have some things that point to some oddities about the child that, it wasn't his upbringing thus far. It wasn't anything like that. It seemed to be something internal with the child already. Now, this is not to say as he grew up that he didn't act and seem like a normal kid and have a lot of normal interactions with people, although we would learn later that as he did grow up, there were a lot of doubts and concerns within him that later would formulate into rage because, Bundy never knew his father. And, they're not sure who his father was. It could be a man named Jack Worthington. That's the one that I give in the book. He was a sailor that flew in from the Second World War, had a brief affair with Ted's mother, Louise. And Ted was a product of that. But where most people can adapt to that, Ted never could. And it sparked this real rage in him about it. And Ted was never the kind of person that could let things go, and he had a lot of issues when he was young. But the thing of it is, whatever he was growing up, he was not a predator at that time. There's a possibility that he became a predator at the age of 14, because there is a possibility. It's not a certainty, but there is at least a possibility based on something Bundy said once, that he may have killed an 8-year-old girl named Anne Marie Berg in 1961. But even if he didn't do that, most of his young years until he became an adult were non-predatory. They spoke, he had a messed up personality, but there's one thing to have that, and then as that formulates into a predatory personality later in the adult years when you begin hunting people and committing murder. So, he wasn't so much of a danger, although he had these internal things earlier in his life, but then they would culminate into what he became. So, but you got to remember this about Bundy. No matter what we know about him, and no matter the things that we could point to, there's still a sense of mystery as to why. Bundy at the end blamed pornography. It wasn't pornography that turned him into a killer of women, a mutilator of women, and somebody that wanted to have sex with them after they were dead because he was a necrophile.
Well, do you believe?
Doesn't do that.
Well, Kevin, it's funny, Chris, not funny in a humorous way. I didn't mean that, but we
You're
talk
right.
a lot on the show. We've talked about serial killers and mass killers, and one of the questions you've already answered for somebody was how much of his upbringing, did you think was part of creating that monster personality? And you're saying, well, it really wasn't. But because we see, with mass killers and serial killers, or just a lot of other problems, a lot of kids experience, problems in their upbringing, dysfunctional families.
Yes.
They're subject to violent movies and violent video games, but only a small portion of them actually act out on that. So the question is it the stimuli, or is it a combination of the stimuli plus some mental dysfunctionality? And what did you see that with? What do you think with Bundy, right, or something completely else?
Yeah. that's exactly it. I'm thinking that, for example, most kids that look at pornography, they're just thinking about having sex with girls or women or what have you. But somewhere along the line with Bundy later on, he started mixing that with violence and sexual things with violence. And, he loved those detective magazines. And I remember those. I mean, I'm 63. Bundy, if he were alive, he'd be 70. But I remember the detective magazines. And I would go into, like, these convenience stores, and I'd see them on the shelf. And invariably, they had to do with a man attacking a woman or restraining a woman. She had large breasts. He had her tied up, or she was in great fear of him. And even as a kid, I used to think, these are odd magazines. These are odd. Well, he was drawn to that. And, maybe that helped give birth to violent fantasies against women. However, there's a lot of people that want to blame the Bundy family. But you really can't do that, because when Louise took little Teddy out to Browns Point, which is very close to Tacoma, Washington, when he was just a small boy, she married a guy named Johnny Bundy, who became his adoptive father. That's where he got the name Bundy. They went on to have 4 additional children. And so the 7 of them were living in a house together, and everybody was normal and grew up normal. I mean, they had their problems. I get that. And so did his siblings, but they grew up normal. But the only one that didn't grow up normal is Ted. So whatever happened to him, it's going to be not just the stimuli, but the makeup of who he was on the inside is what produced that horrible, diabolical individual that he would ultimately become. So yeah, it's a really
and you think that
odd thing.
That personality was just in him. It was going to come out sooner or later. So nothing happened that you think in his growing up at age 14 that caused that, or it was sort of a catalyst. It was just who he was and who he was going to become, no matter what.
Right.
Is that what you think?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as you know, psychopaths, sociopaths, they don't often seek treatment. And, one wonders, had he sought treatment, could it have helped him? We don't know, but they don't normally look for that. They just, they are consumed a lot of times by their problems. But a lot of times they'll be silent with people. They won't tell people what they're thinking or anything, and they'll just go on with their lives. So leaving it to that, when Bundy started to, and we don't know exactly when this switch flipped, but whenever he started to mix his sexual fantasies with violent fantasies, I'm sure as an FBI agent, I mean, when people go down these roads, it's going to go from the fantasy realm to the real realm. There's going to be a metamorphosis at some point. The farther someone goes, I mean, they don't always go to the place where Ted Bundy goes, but the more you fantasize and the more you go in those areas, the greater chance of it becoming a reality, and you cross from fantasy to reality. And that's exactly what he did.
Now, was it a gradual change? Did he start becoming, abusive, physically abusive, and raping girls, and then to murder, or did he seem to flip the switch, go straight to murder?
Well, we don't know. Let's say, though, that he didn't kill Amory Burr. If he did, then that was his first murder.
Right.
Now, he probably killed, we don't know for sure, maybe the first time in 72, if he didn't kill Burr. He absolutely killed probably one in 73 because he accidentally flipped and admitted pet to Bob Keppel. Mm-hmm. But 1974 was different for Bundy. No matter if there were sporadic murders before then, 1974 was the launch into full-time murder, where he was saying goodbye to his normal life, and he was going to go into a life of murder, unabated murder, where it was just going to be one after the other, and he was going to continue that until he was captured or killed. Now,
excuse me, but how old was he at that time?
Oh, he was. Let's see. He started kill 1974. What was it? 46. So what was he? what was he, 20, what was 46, 56, 66, and 8.
All right.
I think, let's say 28. Now, he probably killed before 74.
Right.
But by the time he started killing, he was probably 27, 28 years old. So, he was getting up there a little bit, but so we don't know. I'm personally convinced, he killed prior to 74, but it probably was sporadic. And Bundy admitted to a doctor, and sometimes he talked out of both sides of his mouth. He admitted to a doctor that Dr. Norman, that he had absolutely killed 2 women when he was back east, back in like 1969. That may very well be. He later would deny that, but we know that he killed in 6 states. He even admitted to that. Some people believe he killed in even more states, but again, there's a sense of mystery. Also, it's the total number of victims. 30 people is a lot of people to kill, but they're thinking that between 30 and 36, and it's probably closer to 36, although there are some people that believe that figure goes higher. I happen to think it probably goes slightly higher because of the fact, although he would talk about murdering co-eds, adult women, he had a real problem with admitting or talking about the killing of teenage girls. But we also know he killed teenage girls. And he killed Lynette Culver. Well, she was a preteen. She was 12. And his last victim was Kim Leach, and she also was 12. So we do believe that he killed more than that. So, it could be up to 40. I mean, it could be up to 50, but it's not going to be. I don't say anyway it's higher than that. Some people have said he probably killed 100. That's absurd. I don't believe it. Even Bundy said, he admitted 30 people is a lot of people to kill. So, but I just don't believe it's quite that low. 36, 40, something above that. And
all right, so when he was 27, 28, and he started this, what was he doing for a living? How was his lifestyle outside of killing? It was very normal to the rest of the world, was it not?
Well, yeah, and here's the thing about Bundy. Well, Bundy would he was a smart guy, and by the time the killings of 1974 started, and I'll kind of paint a picture there, and then we can work ourselves back and then forward. But by that time, he was not only a rising star in the Republican Party in Washington State, mixing with a lot of influential people. But he had graduated from college. He finally graduated, I think, in 72. And he was in law school by 74 at the University of Puget Sound. And he had the desire, at least this is what he would say, to either go into law or politics after graduation. And I will tell you this, from what he succeeded in doing with his life, had he not had this insatiable desire to kill, he would have gone places, be it law, if he'd been an attorney or in politics. He even voiced once that he might have liked to become, governor of Washington State. So whether he would have made that, I don't know, but he absolutely would have had a good life, very productive life. But that, so that was his desire. Now, the funny thing about Bundy is, so that's when that happened. But before he got there, because of the issues that he had, it took him a long time to get out of college. He used to have some very menial jobs. He was a stocker at a Safeway. He worked very hard at Griggs Lumber Mill in earlier years. He worked for Pedline Medical Services, I think in 1970. And this is interesting because he would pilfer things from Pedline, like plaster of Paris, and he may have gotten some crutches from them. He may have even gotten a speculum from them, just kind of stolen now and then items from them, because even back then, he was thinking of abduction. The idea of abducting females and committing murder had been with him way before 1974. He had been fantasizing that for a number of years. And if you look at when he left Pedline, which was 70 or 71, some of the stuff he held on to until that real launch in 1974. So he was a predator that was, he admitted that when he was up, it might have been up in New Jersey, it was somewhere back east, he attempted to abduct a woman, and it didn't go well. And he had to break it off. And, he probably frightened her or whatever, and she ran. But, it's like I say in my book, it's not that he was lacking aggression.
Mm-hmm.
He was bubbling over with it, but he lacked the skills necessary to become an abductor who could, get away with it. It would take a lot of planning and a lot of learning about himself and restraint and what he could do and could not do. And it took him a long time to hone his skills as a very good abductor of women. But he finally got there. And so, he had this stuff from Pedline, in the closet or whatever, and, started using that stuff in 1974. But Ted was an up-and-coming guy. I mean, everybody that looked at him, some people were envious of him because he was having such success in his life. And again, it was the darkness that was in him. And the thing about Bundy, probably there was a normal sliver of him that throughout his earlier years toyed with the idea of having a normal life. But somewhere along the line, he had to let go of that. And when he did, he knew that he was never going to be married, even though he had a girlfriend, Liz Clover. She calls her name Kendall, her pen name, because she wrote the book The Phantom Prince. But he was never going to be married. He's never going to have children. He's never going to have a normal life. His life would be solitary and predatory. And that's what 1974 was all about. He was launching himself into unabated murder, and it would be because, and that's the only thing that would guide him. Now, when he did this in 1974, you can see in hindsight, things start slipping away from him pertaining to his political commitments and other things. And you could see that the interest was no longer there, but he would do just enough so not to raise suspicion. But the normal things were in his life were falling away because he was committing so much time to the act of murder. And it's like Bob Keppel said, here's a guy who thinks 24/7 about murder, and that is not an exaggeration.
Right.
From 1974 on, it was just all about slaughtering women.
Let me ask you this, Kevin, because you talked about, he had this sort of somewhat small desire to lead a normal life, but he was drawn by this overwhelming, fantasy world and desire. Did he finally capitulate to that desire grudgingly, meaning like, oh my God, it's just overtaking me, the urge is too great, I can't fight this demon? Or was it more of, hey, I enjoy this more than trying to lead a normal life, I'm just going down this route? Which do you think it was?
That's a good question. I think maybe he would have, there's always the possibility that he had momentary wishes at various points that he could be normal. But he never voiced those. But they were probably evident there. See, here's the thing about Bundy. He wanted to kill women, but he also wanted to be loved by a woman. And that's what was going on with Liz Kendall. He was also a user of women and user of people for financial reasons or whatever. But he had this relationship with Liz Kendall or Liz, Clover for 6 years. And, even though he wasn't faithful to her and he'd have other women and things like that, he always came back to her because he needed that. Now, you would think if you're going to slaughter women, then you're not going to need any support from women because you're actually destroying them. But no, he still needed some support, some emotional support for women. So just as he needed that, you could also say, could there have been times when he wished that he would, go and have a normal life? Yes, but the main thing about Bundy and the main thing about these people is that, and this is true of Bundy, his love for murder and possessing these people and killing these people was so great that he finally reached the point that not only was he able to cross over from fantasy to reality, but he was very glad to do so. And I say in my book is that at that time there would be no exit ramps or anything. I mean, they weren't necessary. He was on this freeway of murder. He never had any intention of getting off, and everything he did from that time forward, it was just to keep the mask in place and to make sure that people saw him as a normal person, because that's the only way that he could get away with it, is that as long as people don't suspect him. But no, that's the thing about that. That's the thing that makes 1974 so extremely critical, is because that's where he finally crossed over forever. No matter the few that he may have killed earlier, that's when he made it. You hate to say it, but a career of murder, right. And it was going to be 24/7. And so that was a totally different thing for him. And at that point, no, he was glad for what he was doing. And it's crazy because, by the time, this had been going on a long time, and I don't want to jump way ahead, but later when he's in Florida, when he's almost at the end of it before he's arrested down there, I say, he's moving through oceans. He's separated from family. He has no family. He has no friends. He has no girlfriends. He's separated from anything that ever meant anything to him, ever. Even the locations of where he lived that meant something to him back in Washington State, no longer there. Everything was foreign. Everything was gone.
Right.
And still, so he's like a shark moving through oceans of people, looking for people to devour. That's what
let's talk about that. Ted, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about his MO. How did he identify women that he wanted to attack or kill? Was there a certain type, a certain look? Did they represent something to him? Was it a matter of opportunity? What was his MO, and what drove him to attack that particular woman?
Yeah, his well, of course, you got to remember the ladies back in the 1970s. They look so much alike. I mean, many of them have long hair parted in the middle. You didn't see a lot of short-haired ladies back then. They all kind of look like. Some people believe that he preferred dark-haired women. He had a girlfriend, Diane Edwards, who jilted him. She was a rich lady from San Francisco. She really crushed him. He later got her back once he was in law school. She'd agreed to marry him again. He dumped her, and that was the way to pay her back. But some people believe that he killed women with dark hair parted in the middle because of Diane. I won't necessarily rule that out, but I don't really give a lot of credence to it. I don't really believe it. It may be that he had a thing for women with dark hair. That could very well be true. One thing we know for a fact, we absolutely know, is that he only wanted to kill Caucasian women. Because I have a story of somebody who was a Native American girl who was, when Bundy was trying to abduct an individual, she thought he was handsome and was trying to get her to him to notice her. But he didn't want anything to do with her. So we know he wanted to kill only Caucasians, and it may be that he did have a thing for women with dark hair. Now, his MO could change over time. And I have an interesting story, and since you're from the FBI, you will appreciate this.
Okay.
I wrote the book sequentially, beginning with the murders in Washington State, and when I got to when he killed from Washington State, and he made that whole area a hotbed of investigative activity, he left and he went to Utah, quote, to go to law school, unquote, but really he just needed a new killing ground. And then, it became hot there, and then he would go and kill in Colorado, and he killed up in Idaho. And there was a 12-year-old girl that he killed up in Idaho by the name of Lynette Culver. And Michael Fisher, the investigator out of Colorado, told me, he said, I hadn't yet gotten a file on Culver. So I was talking to Mike about other cases, and I just happened to mention I was going to be writing about Culver next. He said, oh, well, by the way, do you know that Bundy drowned her in the bathtub at the Holiday Inn. I said, no, I did not know that. So I said, oh, okay. So that's basically all I knew. I had her name and I knew that. So you probably heard of Bill Hagmeyer. Bill Hagmeyer was one of the behavioral science unit people that had been very close to Bundy for the last couple of years of his life, became, quote, friends with him. Bill told me other FBI agents couldn't understand that, why they become so close with Bundy. And I thought, are you kidding? You got to be kidding me. They don't understand that. You become close with somebody like Bundy, so you get information. They trust you. They open up. It's as clear as a bell. Anyway, he told me that, so we laughed about that. That they couldn't understand that. But anyway, he was really close to Bundy. And so I called Bill up one day, and I hadn't gotten the case file yet, and I hadn't talked to any investigators that worked the Culver case. And I said, Bill, and I knew Bill had sat in with every confession that Bundy ever made. I said, Bill, let me ask you a question. There's this girl I'm getting ready to write about. Her name is Lynette Culver. The only thing I know her name, and I know how Bundy killed her. He drowned her in the bathtub at the Holiday Inn. And he said, well, Kevin, he said, I know I have great respect for the detective that told you that, because he and Mike Fisher were friends. He said, but I sat in on every confession Bundy ever made, and I do not remember anything like that. That did not come forth in any of those confessions. I said, oh, okay. Now, at the time, I'm the researcher, and I'm thinking, well, here's an expert. He would know. I said, well, maybe Mike's wrong. Maybe Mike got some bogus information. So I said, okay, Bill. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I'll try to check on this, and if I find out anything about it, I'll let you know. So I called Mike Fisher up on the phone. I said, Mike, and I explained what happened with Bill. He said, oh, okay. Well, he said, what you need to do is call Russ Renault, the Idaho investigator that interviewed Bundy, because Russ told me how Bundy killed her down there, after his execution and everything. And, there was a whirlwind thing for 3 or 4 days before Bundy's death. He's confessed all this stuff. Well, and Hagmeyer is in every one of them, and that's a fact. So I called Russ Renault. I called Russ Renault, and I said, Russ, I was on the phone with Bill Hagmeyer, and he had no idea that she would drown in the bathtub. I said, is that true? He said, yes, it is. And he said, yes. And here's why Bill doesn't know it. He said, we were interviewing Bundy. We only had 1 hour. We were covering 2 cases, the murder of Lynette Culver and also the murder of the Idaho hitchhiker that Bundy killed on his way to Utah in September of 1974. He said, we only had an hour, so we were going quickly. We were jumping back and forth between 2 cases. Of course, later I got the transcript, and everything, just like what Russ told me. And he said, we asked what he did with her, and he said, well, he had dumped her in a river 5 miles north of Pocatello, which is probably the Snake River. And so when Bundy and when Russ asked the manner of death, he said the death would be drowning. Well, they just their hour was up. They were talking, and as they were walking out of prison, Russ turned to his co-investigator, a guy named Randy Everett. He said, Randy, Bundy never really said exactly how he killed her. He said it was drowning. Would you go back into prison and see if you can talk to Bundy and clarify that? And Bundy had said, look, I know an hour is not a lot of time, but if you'd like, I can answer more questions. If I can do that, I will. So Randy Everett went back into the prison, and lo and behold, they allowed him to see Bundy. They put Randy in a room. Then about 15, 20 minutes later, here comes Bundy. Now, Bill Hagmeyer's not there. Bundy's attorney is not there. This is an unscheduled meeting. And so they sat down, and Randy asked him about that. He said, oh, yeah. He said, well, I drowned her in the bathtub. And I say in my book, Bundy didn't say and Everett did not ask whether Culver had gotten into the bathtub of her own, volition, or whether Bundy may have choked her into unconsciousness and then drowned her. But it was confirmed. So, and Bundy also, of his own free will, said also to Everett, he said, and also I had sex with her after she was dead. Of course, he's a necrophile, and he loved that. And so I said, oh, okay, so it is true. Now, here's something that even Bill Hagemeyer didn't know. No fault of Bill, because that meeting technically shouldn't have taken place. And in fact, when I told Bill about it on the phone the first time, when I was asking him if he knew anything about it, you could tell he was kind of, he was a little miffed by it. It seemed that way to me. And because it was an unscheduled thing, and it shouldn't have occurred. So anyway, so I emailed Bill, and I said, well, Bill, what we talked about is true. I got off the phone with Randy. He confirmed that that's how, Bundy drowned her. And so, that was one of these things that turned up that even he didn't know. So see, that was a big change in his MO, because he normally, and Bill told me, he said on the phone, he said, now, and this is graphic, but I just have to say it. People are going to study the Bundy case, they have to know the truth. When he told me, when he doubted the story of the drowning in the bathtub, he said, that Bundy liked to have sex with his victims from behind while strangling them. And I said, yes, I'm aware of that. And, it didn't fit the MO. So here you've got Bundy, changing from that to drowning the girl in the bathtub. And the MO would change. And the funny thing about the MO, it could change and then go back, and change and then go back. And when Bundy killed little Kim Leach, which turned out to be his last victim in Florida, he too was having sex with her from behind, but instead of choking her with an electrical cord, he slit her throat with a hunting knife that he had purchased. By the way, that murder kit that came into the house, it contained the electrical cord, rope, ski mask, ice pick.
That was actually one of the questions. One of the questions was to describe what was in that kit. So go ahead. People want to know that.
Yeah. In fact, it's in my book, The Bundy Murders, but I have released that. You'll find a couple color photographs circulating of Bundy's murder kit that I took in 2005, and you'll see an orange electrical cord. You'll see a white rope. You'll see strips of cloth that he had torn, and these still have the FBI, lab thing on it or whatever. And then he had, the ski mask. He had the Glad bags. He had 2 right-handed gloves. Now, this is interesting. Bundy was left-handed, but obviously he didn't like dragging bodies with his left hand. So he had 2 right-handed gloves only, 2 different ones, a puffy ski type, and then a woolen one with like a brown leather palm thing. And so he must have used those for dragging bodies. So that told me, well, he had to drag. A lot of times he would drag bodies not too far off of the road. He might have tried to carry them, but basically he just dragged them. So he would put this glove on and drag them. And so those were in the kit. Now, originally with the kit was, of course, the crowbar and the handcuffs and the pantyhose mask. The handcuffs and the the crowbar was in the care of Judge Hanson in Utah. He passed away a couple of years ago. Maybe his family has it. The handcuffs are in the 3rd District Court, I think, of Utah. And the pantyhose mask, Jerry Thompson took to Florida to compare with the mask that they found in the apartment of one of his victims that he attacked, to make a comparison. For some reason, the Judge Coward down there wouldn't allow it, but in any event, it did have similar knots in it and things like that. But anyway, everything else that was in the kit, and it was a nice full kit. I mean, he had everything that he needed right there, was in that bag. And so, but yes, and so that's what was in the kit. And it's kind of odd, to have that stuff and be looking at. Also in that kit were tins that with the FBI tape on them, where they had gathered hair from his car, pubic hair. It had the pubic hair of 4, maybe 5 of his victims, and they also had recovered the head hair of Carol DeRange. And Carol DeRange, I don't care how many people say they escaped Bundy. There's only one person that really escaped Bundy, who was when Bundy was in the act of attacking them, and that was Carol DeRange.
And how did she escape? How did she escape?
Oh, well, what was interesting, Bundy had lured Carol from the Fashion Place Mall. He was a police officer, and that somebody tried to break in her car, and he said, I'm going to take you over to the substation across the street, but it wasn't a substation. So he said, well, you need to follow me to the Murray Police Department. Instead of doing that, he got in his Volkswagen, smelled alcohol in his breath. He turned and did a U-turn, went down, took a left at Fashion Boulevard, which runs behind the mall, went about, just several blocks, and pulled along the side of what's known as the Macmillan School. It's still there, and attacked her. And it's the only time he messed up an attack. And what he did was he started fighting her, and she knew he was trying to bash her in the head with a crowbar, and he had gotten handcuffs on one wrist, was trying to get the handcuff on the other wrist. He accidentally cuffed the same wrist, which allowed her to keep flinging her arms.
Right.
She was able to get out of the car, and she started running down the road. He jumped out of the car as well, chased her, but then these headlights were coming down the street. It was an old couple. They picked up this terrified woman. So Bundy, he got in his vehicle, and he was already in that altered state of murder. You know, people aren't normal. They're in this altered state of murder. They're transforming into something that they usually are not, and it's quite evident. So he jumped on the freeway, the I-15. Probably drove through the neighborhoods for a while, but then he got on I-15 and drove up to Bountiful, Utah, which is 15 or 20 minutes. It happened to pick up a brochure a few weeks before of a play being held in the Viewmont High School, the most unlikely place for abduction. It's a high school that's buried in a neighborhood, totally safe for most of the times. And because he had picked up this brochure a couple weeks before, he went in, and later that evening, he abducted a girl named Debbie Kent that was trying to leave because Carol DeRanch lived. Debbie Kent died, and he was able to murder her. But
Kevin, after Carol escaped, was she able to give information to the police that eventually led to him?
Oh, yes.
What happened after that?
Yes. Well, she described, he identified himself that night as Officer Roseland, and he had showed her some kind of fake badge or whatever. But she described him. She gave a really good description of him and how well dressed he was and what he looked like, and his face and his hair. That he drove a Volkswagen, and now this was November of 1974 that this occurred. Bundy didn't even come on their radar until August of 1975, when he was arrested in Granger, Utah, one night. And Bundy would later say he wasn't hunting that night he was arrested, but he was, because he had taken his passenger seat of the Volkswagen and laid it in the back seat. And the reason why he would do that is that he could whack a girl, lay her down there on the floor, cover with a blanket, and then be on his way. It would be a lot easier than if you whack her and just try to, prop her in your seat. Although he did pick up some girls from hitchhiking, he whacked them in the head, and then I guess he pushed them on the floor as best he could. It's pretty cramped. So if he was hunting and he really trying to obtain a victim, and it wasn't something by chance, he would often take the seat out and lay it in the back seat or whatever. And when he was arrested, his murder kit was open, so stuff was spilling out of it. So he was hunting that night. But anyway, when he was arrested, the only reason why they figured out that Bundy was connected is because when Jerry Thompson got wind of it, he used to meet with other detectives in these little cities around Salt Lake, like every Tuesday, and they'd compare cases. And when Jerry Thompson heard that there was a guy with a Volkswagen who had this kit with him, which was more than just a burglar's kit, they could tell that because it had stuff for tying people up, and that the guy had also handcuffs on him. Bundy Thompson remembered what had happened to Carol, and started, as they say in police jargon, working him, and that's how Bundy was brought out of the shadows. But and so it's true. Bundy was not going to be able to last forever, but things were going to start happening. You could only go so long when the cops are going to get a lucky break. They never got that break in Washington State. Those detectives, Bob Kepler, those detectives, they worked so exceedingly hard, but Bundy didn't leave a shred of evidence. Even when Bundy was confessing to murder at the end, they couldn't charge him in Washington State because of lack of evidence.
Now, do you
But
think
the
if that was
popular-
today,
yeah.
but if that was today, because you
Yeah.
talked about, a lot of hair left behind, do you think if they had the DNA then that we have now, the testing
Yeah.
we have and some of the forensics,
Yeah.
we would not have gone on that long? Obviously, with cameras, we would have picked up his car elsewhere. Do you
Right.
think we would have outsmarted all
Right.
that? Hard to say.
Well, people ask me about that, and I'll tell you this: women are being killed even today. And
Yes.
if Bundy lived today, what he would do, he would adapt. He would adapt to what's out there.
Right.
He would never. I don't think he'd ever. Well, here's what Bundy said. He said, "Those that I have buried have never been found. The only ones that were ever found were the ones he dumped." So we know that he would bury everybody. We also know that he wouldn't probably be abducting much in cities or downtown areas. He would be the kind of guy that would scope out areas where there weren't cameras. He would have to become more selective. It would be far more dangerous for him to commit abductions. But here's the thing about people that want to kill women. There were other people slaughtering women when Bundy was out there. There's people that are killing women today. They're not going to stop.
Yes.
Bundy would still probably last longer than a lot of other people because he was such an efficient planner. But anything can happen. He could have been caught almost immediately, but it just never happened. But when people say to me, well, do you think he wouldn't kill because of all? No, he would still kill. He would still find a way to kill because he was driven to kill. So it would make it hard. Think of all the people now with cell phones. It would make it really difficult. He would have to adapt to that and become slicker. So, who knows what his tally would
Right,
be.
we'll never know.
But
Back in the early 80s when I was a cop working on a serial rape case, I mean, we got this guy. He was making a lot of attempts to make sure he was not identified by, again, his MO, how he attacked the women, broke in. He would wipe down their bodies to make sure he didn't leave behind any DNA and go through other things without getting too descriptive on the show, to make sure no DNA was left behind. And this was the early 80s. And we identified him not through any witness identification, just through other investigative means. So this is going back maybe 10 years after Ted Bundy was at the height of his activity. Let me ask you another question, because if you don't mind,
sure.
we're getting close to time.
No.
Someone threw in a question here about the time he was in Washington. Was he ever suspected of being the Green River Killer? Do you know anything about that?
No, the Green River Killer. I don't know. He was later. I think he operated about a decade later. Now, he did try to help Bob Keppel with that. And Bob Keppel agreed to meet Bundy to talk about it because really Keppel was there to try to gain information about Bundy's murders and to gain some rapport so that he might talk one day with him about those, which he ultimately did. But Bundy really enjoyed seeing the case files because, he loved that stuff. So, he would, anything had to do with murder, even if it wasn't the ones he was committing, and he would say something. Now, they never caught, Bundy never contributed to anything that helped them catch him. But still, though, the actual Green River Killer was later.
Now, during the time Bundy was going through these murders, if you know, was he carrying on any nonviolent relationships? Either, having male friends, going out with the guys, or having a girlfriend that he did not assault. Was he having that kind of normal life?
Oh, yeah. He had women that he would enjoy having sex with and being nice to. And, I mean, he would hit them up for money and stuff like that. But I mean, no, he had people that he would be nice to and normal with. And but the thing about Bundy, when he first started out, there was all this diabolical monstrous thing inside him, but he could keep it well contained. But as the years rolled on, he had trouble, and it even came out with his girlfriend Liz, and they were having they had gone on a raft trip one time and down to Yakima, and it was going to be like an all-day thing for them, and he started out real normal, but then he became very moody and not talking a lot. And they got out of the boat. They had lunch on the shore. Then they got back in the raft, and we're going downstream. And all of a sudden, she said she found herself in the river, coming up gasping for air. He had pushed her out of the raft. Now, here's the funny thing. not funny, but odd.
I know what you meant. Yeah.
She said, as I looked at him, his face was blank. Now, that face that was blank, that's what all these women were seeing when he was slaughtering them. And I say in the book, the killer was now with her. Now later, Bundy helped her get back on the raft. Normal Ted reemerged, and she was really mad at him for doing that, and he played it off as a joke. But I've got to think he wondered about that later, because that monstrous presence had come to the surface, and he had pushed her in the water, and man, his face was gone when she came up out of that water, and it was just stark to her. Anyway, so this murderous attitude kept coming closer and closer to the surface at what you would call inopportune times. And so, that's the thing about this thing that happens to people. So while it was well ensconced, for the most part, early on, these things would come. And by the time he got to Florida, he was a totally different killer. I mean, the attack on Cayamega was a frenzy. It was nothing like the MO of how he had killed back in the Pacific Northwest, or even in Utah or Colorado. And so he was a different person. He was kind of an unkempt person. Back in Washington State, being handsome, being articulate, he would draw women to him. It was a natural thing. By the time
Kevin, let me ask you, I want to get two questions in for the end here.
Go ahead.
Right, so the women that he chose to just date or whatever, have normal relationships with, not get violent with, was that just a sort of a cognizant decision as a charade, or was there something about them that sort of made him not want to kill them or hurt them?
No, those women, he did enjoy the dating them. It was two Bundys. He did enjoy them. He said, I never hurt anybody that I knew, people that he cared about. He did want that. There were women that he wanted to just meet and be a boyfriend to, a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. And it wasn't to show people anything like that, because he had Liz, and he could have kept that charade going. So it wasn't for that. There was a part of him that needed that. That's what makes this whole thing so odd.
It does, yeah. It is very interesting. So it wasn't their appearance, it was just something that he just had to have in his life.
Yeah, he just liked it. And so the women that he was like that with, they didn't have anything to fear. But it was the women that, it was the other women. Now he did say this. He said he picked up a hitchhiker once, and he laughed, and he called it he was in his Reformation period. But he said, there was a desire in me to kill the woman. But he said, instead, I wanted to see how far I could take this and still let her go. He said, so they had sex, they had a good time and all this stuff, and he finally just kind of let her go. But he called it his Reformation period. But he admitted he was drawn to kill her. But again, that was not somebody that he knew per se. You understand? Now, if he'd have known her, well, no, he might have wanted to have sex with her, but he wouldn't want to kill her. And that was just kind of a peculiar thing about Bundy. So he had those women on one side, and then the depersonalized victims on the other.
All right. Kevin, I tell you, this was great. I can't believe how fast the hour went talking to you. There's so much more.
Man.
And this question's backed up here. So in the last minute, let me give you time. Please tell everybody where they can find your book. And I know you're working on a number of projects with television having to do with Ted Bundy. Why don't you let everybody know what's coming up?
Yes. Well, I've got several documentaries I've shot in the last few months for major networks, cable networks, the Real Channel, Oxygen Channel, and then there's another major channel, but I can't say right now until they give me the okay. And there's others to shoot. My books, you can check out my page on Amazon. Just Google, Kevin Sullivan, the Bundy Murders, and it'll come up. Go down, click on my name at the author thing, and you can see all my books. Or I have 6 different publishers, but I write primarily right now with Wild Blue Press, and you can go to wildbluepress.com. Check me out as an author there. Not only are my books there, but I write true crime blogs, and they're all free. You can read them, and they're archived. So that's the best way to find out more about me.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. That was best-selling author Kevin Sullivan. We thank you for your time, buddy. Let's stay in touch on social media. All right?
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'll see you later.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. That was great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and we'll be back again next week. And just to confirm a rumor that some of you, at least around Kansas, my home state now, may have heard, yes, I am running for governor. That's not a joke. It's quite serious. I filed the papers, and I'll be campaigning over the next few months, but we will continue to bring Crimes and Times and cover the topics that you all find so interesting. Once again, thank you for joining us. Please go to YouTube and like us and subscribe, and like us on Facebook and spread the word. I'm Michael Tabman. Good night.